He shaped the sound of an entire generation, yet he was never the poster boy for it. While others stood in the glare of the spotlight, he quietly worked behind the glass, constructing the very soul of the music people came to love. From the silence of recording studios to the roar of world stages, Benny Andersson lived through the thrilling rise, the painful unraveling, the eventual rebirth of one of pop's most iconic bands. Yet, the story he chooses to tell today is not about glittering disco balls or sparkling sequins. It is about the exhaustion that wore him down, the regrets that haunted him, the fractured love that slipped away, and the long, painful silence that followed even after the applause had ended. For decades, the world speculated, filling in the blanks of his private life. Now Benny has finally spoken, and what he reveals is deeper, sadder, and more soul-stirring than anyone ever expected. His truth is not simply the story of a musician, it is the story of a man who spent his life building a kingdom of sound, long before the world danced with joy to the rhythm of Dancing Queen, or wiped away tears to the melancholy of the winter. Takes it all. Benny Andersson was already laying the invisible foundations of what would become one of pop music's most enduring legacies. Born on December 16, 1946, in the Västkusten district of Stockholm, Benny grew up in a working-class home, where music was not seen as a career path but as a beloved tradition. His father, who worked as a civil engineer, and his grandfather, a self-taught musician, placed an accordion in his hands when he was just 6 years old. That simple, humble instrument became the key that unlocked a lifelong fascination with melody, harmony, and emotional expression. Unlike many of his peers who dreamed only of fame and stardom, Benny's motivation was different. He was not drawn by the desire to be admired on stage. Instead, he was driven by curiosity, by the need to understand how music worked. From studying the precise mathematical beauty in Bach to absorbing the earthy storytelling of Swedish folk songs, Benny's musical education was self-made. He learned piano entirely by ear, and with a natural gift, he could replicate melodies after hearing them only once or twice. By the age of 10, he was already entertaining family gatherings and performing at school concerts. He was never known for flashy showmanship, but for his sensitivity to tone, his ability to infuse emotion into every note. By 1964, at just 18 years old, Benny joined the Hepstars, a Swedish rock band so popular they were dubbed the Swedish Beatles. His presence transformed the group's sound almost overnight. Suddenly, they were topping the charts with songs like Sunny Girl and Wedding, both written by Benny himself. These early hits revealed not only his gift for unforgettable melodies, but also sharpened his skills in arranging music for the studio and commanding live performances. Soon, Benny was recognized as the band's musical brain, all while quietly learning the business side of the industry and developing his technical expertise. Then, in 1966, came a night that changed everything. At a mutual friend's party, Benny met Björn Ulvaeus, a member of the folk pop group the Hootenanny Singers. Both young musicians shared a love for harmony, arrangement, and attention to detail. That evening, they jammed together, and from that moment, a deep musical partnership was born. Over the next several years, they began writing songs side by side, experimenting with new styles and structures, and even crafting material for other Swedish artists. Their partnership thrived because of balance. Benny, the emotional composer, and Björn, the witty lyricist. By the early 1970s, the two were not only musical collaborators, but also life partners with two talented women, Agnetha Foltskog, chart-topping Swedish solo singer, and Frid Frida Lingstedt, a jazz singer turned pop star with a rich alto voice. Together, the four of them began a joint project under the long and clumsy name Björn and Benny, Agnetha, and Frid. The name was awkward, but the chemistry was undeniable. In 1973, they tried and failed to win Sweden's selection for Eurovision. But instead of giving up, they returned the following year with Waterloo, a glam-pop anthem so irresistible it won the 1974 Eurovision Song Contest. That victory catapulted them into global stardom almost overnight. Soon after, they trimmed their lengthy name into a simpler, An unforgettable one. ABBA, an acronym formed from their first names. From that moment forward, Benny was no longer just a pop musician, became the sonic architect of ABBA's empire. He approached each song like a painter approaching a canvas, layering instruments with precision, weaving together vocal harmonies and experimenting with synthesizers long before it became fashionable. In the studio, he was known for his meticulous patience. He would spend days reworking a single harmony until it carried the exact emotional weight he wanted. He wasn't chasing trends. He was chasing timelesses, and Eve as Agnetha and Frida dazzled fans in glittering jumpsuits, and Björn penned clever, bittersweet lyrics. It was Benny who sculpted the emotional heart of ABBA's music. His compositions carried a unique duality. Songs like Fernando and Knowing Me, Knowing You shimmered with brightness and joy on the surface, yet underneath, there was always a current of sadness and longing. That was Benny's genius, his ability to hide melancholy inside irresistible melodies, leaving generations of listeners deeply moved by what appeared to be simple pop songs. He was not just writing music, he was building an empire, where every chord, every silence, every note mattered. But even as ABBA soared higher and higher through the 1970s, cracks began to form. On the outside, the group was unstoppable, selling millions, topping charts, touring the world. On the inside, however, the foundations were beginning to wear down, not suddenly, but slowly, like a house eroded by time rather than destroyed by fire. The first visible fracture came in 1979 when Björn and Agnetha divorced. Though they tried to keep things professional while working on the album Super Trooper, the sessions were no longer the same. The glossy pop sound remained, but behind it the atmosphere had grown heavier. 2 years later, Benny and Frida followed the same painful path. Their relationship had once been described as fiery, magnetic, and symbiotic. They met in 1969, long before ABBA was even an idea, and built their bond through music before romance. Frida had once said in a 1975 interview that Benny understood her in ways no one else could. But understanding in the studio did not always translate into the machinations of everyday life. Benny's perfectionism, which made him brilliant in music, left little space for intimacy at home. Frida, deeply expressive and emotional, felt his growing distance. By 1981, Benny confessed to having fallen in love with Mona Nyturklet, a television producer he met during a broadcast special. He told Frida the truth, but the damage was irreparable. Their split was quiet, handled with professionalism. But it left a lasting scar on a BBA's dynamic. That same year, the band released The Visitors, their final studio album. Its songs carried the chill of their unraveling tracks like When All Is Said and Done and Slipping Through My Fingers, dripped with unspoken pain. The sparkle was fading. Though ABBA continued for another year, something essential had already disappeared. When the end finally came, it was not with a bang, but with silence. For over 40 years, ABBA's disappearance was defined by what they did not say. Unlike most legendary bands, there was no farewell tours, no grand press conference, no final triumphant concert. They simply stopped. Their last single, Under Attack, released in December 1982, failed to capture the magic of their earlier hits. There was no follow-up, no curtain call, just a quiet fade into mystery, leaving fans with unanswered questions. For years, none of the band members ever gave a clear or definitive answer about what had really happened. Whenever interviews took place, their words remained vague and carefully measured. The phrase "on hiatus" floated around like a curtain, while their public appearances became rare, controlled, and cautiously polite. In many ways, ABBA stopped being just a band and instead became a myth frozen in time. They were remembered as the perfect pop group, a dazzling phenomenon that simply ceased to exist without offering any explanation to the world. That silence finally shifted in November 2024. Benny Andersson, long known for his quiet introspection and his almost stubborn avoidance of personal publicity, agreed to sit down for an interview with The Guardian. He didn't show up armed with a polished story or a rehearsed narrative. There was no carefully written statement from a publicist, no glossy PR spin designed to protect an image. Instead, Benny did something rare, something disarmingly human. He told the truth plainly. We were exhausted, he admitted. The marriages within the group were falling apart. The music had started to feel unnatural. They realized they had to stop, not for the sake of drama, but to preserve themselves, that simple. Unsentimental statements struck harder than any scandal or rumor ever could. In just a few words, Benny confirmed what so many longtime fans had quietly suspected in their hearts. The breakup had not been born out of betrayal, jealousy, or artistic feuds. It had come from something far more universal: emotional depletion. After years of relentless performing, endless recording, forcing themselves to maintain the illusion of joy while their private lives were unraveling, the group was drained. Their ending wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, almost fatal in its inevitability. Then, in April 2025, Benny opened up even further in a follow-up interview with Billboard. This time, he painted a deeper picture of what the band's final 2 years, 1981 and 1982, had really felt like. What had once been vibrant, joyful collaboration had dulled into uninspired workdays. He and Bjorn were still writing, yes, but the spark had dimmed. The songs arrived more slowly. Studio sessions grew shorter. What had once been passion began to resemble obligation, more like a job than the life-giving force it had been in the past. And perhaps most telling of all, Benny didn't call the ending a failure, nor did he attempt to romanticize it. He described it instead as an inevitable unraveling. It wasn't sustainable anymore, he explained. We couldn't go on pretending not to each other, not to ourselves. That acknowledgement was more than just illuminating, it was healing. For decades, fans had listened to ABBA's final albums, especially The Visitors, and sensed something different. The songs felt more introspective, more melancholic, more weighted with unspoken truths. Tracks like One of Us, like An Angel Passing Through My Room, and The Day Before You Came didn't just sound sad. They were sad. Beneath the polished pop structures lived a heaviness, a quiet ache that spoke of something deeper than fleeting trends. Listeners had always felt it, even if they couldn't quite articulate why. Benny's confession finally validated that feeling. The ache was not imagined. The unraveling beneath the glossy harmonies was real. What is striking is that none of Benny's revelations carried bitterness. He didn't point fingers at Bjorn, Agnetha, or Frida. Instead, spoke of the band's end as though it had been a natural conclusion, like a beautiful, complex machine that had run its course. We had done what we could do, he said. There was nothing left in us to give it honestly. For fans, this was the closure they had never realized they needed. The mystery was no longer mysterious. The silence finally had a reason. And most importantly, the pain that had echoed through ABBA's last songs now had a name: exhaustion, emotional collapse, and the quiet necessity of walking away. After ABBA's dissolution, Frida's journey took an unexpected turn. In 1992, she married Prince Heinrich Russo, Rus of Plowan, stepping into a world few could have predicted for her. Suddenly, the woman who had once commanded disco dance floors found herself living in a Swiss castle, attending galas, banquets, and fulfilling aristocratic obligations. The Swedish press erupted into a frenzy. How could one of pop's most magnetic voices now exist within the rigid framework of European royalty? Yet, life as a princess was far from a fairy tale. Frida struggled with the strictness of aristocratic expectations. The same spontaneity, fire, an emotional expression that had defined her as a performer did not fit easily into the structured, tradition-bound world of royalty. And then, tragedy struck with devastating force. In 1998, her daughter, Anne Lieselot, died in a car accident in New York at just 30 years old. The loss broke her in ways no spotlight or stage could ever heal. The woman who once sang to millions now sought silence. Grief-stricken and withdrawn in her secluded home near Lake Geneva, the glamour of royalty, the fame of her ABBA, years all of it, paled in comparison to the aching emptiness left by her daughter's absence. And yet, in that moment of deepest pain, Benny reappeared. Despite everything, he reached out. He shared a past that no one else in the world could fully understand. In that quiet reconnection, there was comfort not in revisiting the glory days, but in the shared understanding of people who had seen everything fall apart. For Frida, who had once needed the spotlight to feel alive, there was now peace in simply being remembered, made by millions, but by someone who had known her before it all. Then in 2018, something once thought impossible happened. After decades apart, ABBA reunited to record 2 new songs. The announcement stunned the music world not just because it ended a silence of 36 years, but because it marked the beginning of one of the most ambitious projects in music history, ABBA Voyage. By 2021, Benny and Björn had composed a full-length studio album under the same name, with Benny himself taking complete control of production. But more revolutionary than the music was the performance concept. ABBA Voyage was not a traditional concert. It was a digital experience. Using advanced motion capture and avatar technology, the team recreated the band's younger 1979 selves, who performed live on stage, the 10-piece band in a specially built arena in London. The show was an astonishing success. Since its debut, in May 2022, it has sold more than 1.3 million tickets, attracting fans from over 140 countries. The digital avatars did not just mimic, they transcended expectations. Benny, ever the perfectionist, oversaw even the smallest details of sound design, insisting that the performances remain authentic, emotionally precise, and technically flawless. Perhaps most astonishing of all, the band declined a jaw-dropping $1 billion offer for a live reunion tour. They weren't interested in chasing old highs. Instead, they redefined performance on their own terms. The avatars, much like Benny himself, did not need to be physically seen in order to be deeply felt. The music once again spoke for them, as it always had, letting truth flow through melody now. At 78, Benny Andersson no longer hides behind perfect harmonies or the safe walls of a recording studio. In recent interviews, he has been quietly unpacking decades of emotional restraint. He admitted that for him, music was always an escape. He didn't know how to talk about pain, so he composed it instead. At one point, he confessed, "I gave my best lines to songs, not to the people who needed to hear them from me." That single sentence, so raw, so simple, reframes everything we thought we knew. Benny wasn't cold or detached. He was afraid. Afraid to confront the emotions swirling beneath every love song, every breakup ballad, every glittering hit that masked heartache, that fear, that silence, was what ultimately undid ABBA from within. Not drama, not betrayal, just fragility, the kind of human softness that fame never prepares anyone to handle. And yet there is beauty in his honesty, because by finally speaking these truths aloud, Benny has given fans something ABBA itself never truly gave closure. He is reminding us that it was never about perfection. It was always about survival. Music didn't save them from their pain. It was the way they lived through it. Perhaps that's why the songs still endure. They were never polished fantasies. They were real, messy, complicated fragments of 4 people trying to hold themselves together. And now, at last, the quiet man at the piano has finally let us in.